Hey folks, so welcome to a little bit of a new show or experiment or something like that here on the channel that I am for right now calling Let's Talk Disc Golf, but that is subject to change and the format of this is subject to change as well. But essentially what brought this on was that a couple of weeks ago I put a little community post on the YouTube channel here, kind of just asking if people might be interested in me doing a weekly show where I kind of just give my takes and thoughts on different things going on in the scene, whether that be news that just got announced or results of a tournament or a player moving to a new company or whatever the case may be, and just kind of having a regular show where I get to kind of just express my thoughts and opinions and stuff like that. And there seemed to be some interest in that, and so I figured I would give it a shot. You kind of already see a little bit of this going on in the disc golf community with Brody Smith doing the Disc Golf Hour, and Terry Miller has his Drop Zone show that he does where he kind of just discusses a topic or two for about 30 minutes or so, and just kind of a solo act, a monologue, if you will. And maybe at some point I can do Q&A or maybe even do this live or whatever the case may be. But I just knew that I wanted to do something. One, because I want to be able to provide more content on this channel. And while the bread and butter of this channel is going out and playing disc golf and doing various things, playing the sport, it'd be nice to have some type of podcast or something like that that I can do on this channel. Now, a podcast usually would be me and some type of co-host, or maybe me interviewing someone in the disc golf space, something like that. And there may be room for that type of show as well. But those types of shows create their own complications with, you know, everyone having the same availability and scheduling everything. And so I wanted something that I could do where I knew I could crank it out regularly because the only person I had to rely on to do it was me. So I want to try this out, see if folks like it. If they do, maybe it's something I can continue to doing regularly. If they don't, then maybe I pivot to some other type of podcast format or interview series, or maybe I just scrap the whole thing and just kind of move on. But yeah, welcome to this first episode. First off, if you're new here, which I know there's been a lot of new subscribers actually as I'm recording this, because some people have kind of found this channel through me doing the Debate Night podcast over at Foundation. And I really appreciate all of you folks, by the way. I've been getting a pretty nice warm response from the audience of that show. And definitely I appreciate all of you coming on over here and subscribing. I think I've gained like 100 to 150 subscribers in just a couple of weeks thanks to being on that show, and I'm getting very near 1,000 subscribers at the time of me recording this, so that is pretty cool stuff. Kind of want at the top just introduce myself a little bit since it's my first time doing this show, and maybe for some of you it might be your first time seeing this channel. You know, I primarily am an esports commentator. I've been working in that industry for well over 10 years at this point. I started off with the Counter-Strike franchise doing CS 1.6 and Counter-Strike Source back in the day. And then when CSGO came out in 2012, or Counter-Strike Global Offensive, I started commentating that. And I've worked for pretty much every tournament operator you can think of in the esports space that ran Counter-Strike events over the last 10 or so years, including working with E-League on TBS and, you know, companies like MLG and ESL and DreamHack and so on and so forth. Then I also got into Valorant when that first came out, and I've worked with Riot directly as well as different third-party tournament organizers, just, you know, broadcasting events and being a commentator or desk analyst or content creator or whatever. Well, I essentially discovered disc golf a few years ago, right before the pandemic, actually, in like 2019 or so, and kind of fell in love with it. And then when the pandemic happened, it kind of just reinforced that interest because it was like one of the few things I could actually go do with everything being shut down. And so I started playing a ton, and I kind of started to want to create content for it. So I started this channel of me going out there and playing. And eventually I started reaching out to people to try to kind of bridge, I guess, my experiments and skills as a commentator into the disc golf space and do stuff with disc golf because, again, it just became a passion of mine. And luckily, I got to do some things pretty quickly. I got in touch with Jamie Thomas, who works with Disc Golf Pro Tour, that you'll probably know. He's been a commentator and interviewer, but he does a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff now. And he actually got me hosting a show last year on the Disc Golf Network called The Scramble, which is basically a tournament recap series. And I did that for the entire season. Then on top of that, I also got with Gatekeeper Media and was covering the Disc Golf Pro Tour, covering MPO feature cards and chase cards throughout pretty much the entire season, which that was kind of a funny story because at first it didn't seem like that was going to happen, but then they kind of needed someone for, I think it was the Open at Belton, a Silver Series event, and I solo covered that, and it went really well. People seemed to really like it, and then I wound up covering a few more events with Gatekeeper as a solo commentator. And then eventually I started working with Nick Hansen and Nathan Queen, and that went pretty well, and got a lot of reps and practice, and really got to hit the ground running with disc golf a lot faster than I thought I would. Unfortunately, this year, it's kind of been a slow start. For one, the show that I used to do for Disc Golf Network called The Scramble kind of got canceled, and so I don't know what I'm going to be doing with the Disc Golf Pro Tour this year at this point. And also, I was working remotely for Gatekeeper as a commentator, whereas most third-party companies, do everything on site. Everyone's kind of together. And they wanted to move away from doing the remote thing and work with someone that they, are really good friends with and have known for a long time with, I think it's Andrew Fish, who's now doing commentary for Gatekeeper with Nathan Queen and so on. And so I'm kind of not really doing anything officially in disc golf anymore, but certainly the goal is to hopefully get back involved with doing coverage of Disc Golf Pro Tour. The real dream is to be a commentator for the live broadcast, but certainly doing post-produced coverage would be cool as well, and we'll just see what happens. But that's kind of just my background and my credentials, I guess you could say, as to whether or not you feel those are good enough to want to hear what the heck I have to say about disc golf, I guess is up to you. But I figured since this is the first episode and this is all kind of an experiment, I would just kind of introduce myself and kind of throw that out there. And that's that. So for this first episode, I figured I would talk a little bit about the whole leak debate, that is leaking player movement and things of that nature, as well as just discuss who I feel were the winners and losers of this offseason when it came to player acquisitions. At the time of me recording this video, there hasn't really been any events yet other than like some smaller ones. Or I should say, just for the tour, that is, there has been a couple of pretty big, I guess, A tiers with the Maricopa Open and Shelly Sharp out in Arizona. So we can talk a little bit about that, I guess. But really, with this first episode, since there wasn't really many results to follow, I figured this would be kind of more of a special thing where I just talk about leaks and winners and losers of the offseason. So for me, just real quick to give my take on the idea of leaks, I think personally they wind up favoring companies and players more than maybe they realize. I do think that sometimes players and companies get upset when things get leaked because they feel like they miss out on the shock factor of putting out an official announcement where they catch everyone off guard, everyone kind of freaks out, and you pull off this big surprise, and it's this kind of just awesome climax to announcing a move, basically. But I've always thought that leaks coming out early actually helps you because it kind of keeps your news out in the public for an extended period of time. And then it winds up getting picked up by talk shows and podcasts and just gets its runs on social media. And it winds up keeping your name in the press for a longer amount of time as opposed to having no press at all and then all of a sudden just having a big bang on the day of the official announcement, and that's it. I feel like having a leak, you get to kind of have this slow build where people are talking about it. There's a lot of chatter. Again, all publicity is good publicity, and it's just out there. And then you still get kind of that shock factor when you make the official announcement because while people aren't necessarily surprised anymore because they've already heard about it, there's still that sense of doubt in the back of your head on whether or not it's true or not. And then when the official announcement comes out, then boom, you find out, oh, wow, that is real. Maybe you were in denial. Maybe you're like, no way that can be true. And then all of a sudden it winds up being true. You get the official announcement, you get to cash in on that, and you get to just kind of have this extended amount of time where you're in the press, where you have the pre-announcement chatter, the announcement itself, and then after the announcement, you get to cash in on, content. Maybe that player goes out and does interviews now that the announcement is official. And I just feel like it winds up being actually way more value than if you just were doing the shock factor one-time announcement thing and you get to cash in on it once or something like that. That's kind of been my take on it. I think that's particularly the case for big name players. Maybe for smaller names, you're not going to create as much chatter because there's not as much interest. And so maybe the shock factor announcement might be a bit better in that situation. And I don't really think it matters if it is controlled by the company or not. I know some companies will kind of leak it themselves through someone because they want to market it that way. That's actually their whole campaign, their whole plan in the first place is to kind of leak it and then do official announcements. Whereas sometimes it's just because people talk, and when people talk, stuff spreads and eventually gets out to the public, right? And now I know that some people may find certain people being very annoying with how they release things on social media, and it kind of turns out to just be, I don't know, like in a bad taste in people's mouths, the way that some people spread things, and people find it, again, just kind of annoying. It is what it is, but that's kind of where I sit on the leak thing, and I think in general, you'll probably continue to see that. It's just kind of how it works. I mean, it is what you see all the time in other sports, by the way. Like, reporters come out all the time saying this is what my sources are telling me, and it creates these leaks. And sometimes they turn out to be true, sometimes they turn out to be completely false, but it at least has put something out there into the space for people to chat about. It helps, spur on content creation, and it helps, just give something for people to talk about, really, at the end of the day. So I'll kind of leave it at that. Don't want this video to be too long, but that's just kind of my take on leaks, because, of course, there was a lot of them throughout the course of this offseason that was going around. Of course, the biggest one being, of course, Simon Lizotte. And this kind of transitions me into in my opinion, the winners of the offseason. And MVP has to be the biggest winner because they picked up one of the biggest names in disc golf. This guy has a massive social media presence, a massive YouTube channel. I mean, I think the only people that really have bigger YouTube channels than Simon and disc golf are the official coverage channels like a Joe Mess Pro or someone like Brody Smith, who has a massive YouTube channel. But remember, a lot of that channel was built upon trick shots and other things, not purely on disc golf. So if you're talking pure disc golf, Simon Lizotte has the biggest channel essentially of any player out there, and puts content out regularly. He's also incredibly likable. He's now a veteran. He was like the young wonder child that kind of came up and was an exciting player who had the big throws and has just built a massive brand around himself. And so for MVP, kind of a dark horse company that, before they picked up James Conrad and outside of Sarah Hokum, they were not really super in the public eye. I think it was kind of more of like a niche fandom that was kind of created around the gyro technology, and a move like this, picking up Simon, really put your name on the map. Now, you probably don't get here without James Conrad and the Holy Shot and the Envy sales and all that jazz. I'm sure that certainly kind of helped MVP have the momentum to be able to go and grab someone like Simon. But there's no denying that picking up Simon is incredible for MVP, and it's probably the biggest move of the offseason, I would say. Not only does he bring value and content creation and all that jazz, but he has proven that he can move plastic. That's certainly going to be helpful for MVP. He's also proven that he can still compete at a high level. He won 4 events last year. He's improving, actually, as a player, as he's kind of changed his style and become a little bit more conservative and tried to play a little bit smarter golf. And I think a lot of that was due to the injury, kind of preventing him from going for all the crazy Simon lines all the time. He's actually started to really become more consistent as a performer. And it seems from all the content that I've seen since the announcement, the different interviews he's been a part of, that going to MVP has almost just kind of fired him back up. He kind of wants to practice more, have more of a set routine on how he practices. He still feels like his best years are ahead of him performance-wise. And that may or may not be true objectively, but that's how he feels. And so certainly you can't now question his motivation. It seems like he's as motivated as he's ever going to be. And so this could certainly lead to some pretty big things for him and his future as a player. But again, this is a 10-year-long contract, so it's not just about, him being a player. It's also going to be just how he becomes an ambassador for MVP going forward with content, maybe commentary. Who knows what it's going to be, right? It's just one day, as Simon was basically the face of Discmania and was synonymous with Discmania, because this contract is so long and because the sport is growing so much, we have so many new people coming in who may not have that type of mentality about Simon. One day, Simon will instead become synonymous with MVP. And so this was, again, an incredible move. I talked a lot about this on the Debate Night show, so you can kind of go watch that, the first episode. But this kind of wanted to put that out there that, MVP is, of course, a huge winner. Some small things about MVP, though, is that they also obviously keep Sarah Hokum. They keep James Conrad, an extension there. They also have Stacey Haas, which is kind of like a young, upcoming FPO talent who won the Open at Tallahassee in 2021. I believe it was, 2022, I think. Can't remember. It was very recent, though. Either way, they have a couple of things cooking there, too. And maybe this is a sign that even more players will eventually come by as well. I don't think this team will ever be as big as an Innova or a Discraft as far as how many players that they have. But there's no denying that this move certainly puts them even more on the map than they already were after the whole James Conrad thing. Now, another win has to be Discraft because they maintained everyone. Granted, some of that was kind of a given because of how big their contracts were, but they were able to also promote within their company through that process, promoting Corey Ellis and promoting Aaron Gossage, who had some breakout moments last year, as well as Brody Smith, who had a couple big performances last year as well. And while initially people may have just kind of seen him as a content guy and a big brand name that just moves plastic due to his social media presence and his personality, he's now also shown that he's dedicated to getting better at the sport, and he actually has some results to show for it, and that trajectory could easily continue. So, did those promotions within. Then they also go ahead and grab Anthony Barella, which I think was a huge move because we know how talented this kid is just from watching him play. He's probably one of the furthest throwers in the world. I mean, you would certainly put names like Albert Tam and, Double G and, David Wiggins Jr. and a few other people in that category as well. Simon Lizotte, just mentioned him earlier. But Barella is definitely forehand and backhand some of the biggest distance you're going to see in disc golf. He also had some pretty big performances last year, right? I mean, he came in the top 5 at the OTB Open in Ledgestone, had several other top 10 and top 15 finishes on tour last year. And then at the end of the year, he really popped off with some super crazy high ratings at the Arizona State Championship and things of that nature. And now I believe he's able to really dedicate more full time to disc golf, as he's not a full-time student anymore. I think he just does stuff online maybe now. So the fact that he has this crazy skill ceiling and the fact that now he has more time to dedicate to touring full-time, I think is only going to be a good combination. And while he had kind of a rough start this year at Shelley Sharp, he came out and just won the Maricopa Open just a few days before me recording this. And so obviously AB is a big-time pickup for Discraft on the MPO side. Then on the FPO side, they really did some big things. I mean, first off, they picked up Valerie Mandujano, who is a 2-time winner last year at Waco and at the Portland Open. She also had a ton of other top 5 finishes last year, and I think she's ranked number 11 in the UDisc World Rankings for FPO. So definitely a huge talent to pick up to add to the FPO squad, as they already have, Paige Pierce and Missy Gannon and so on, who definitely can bring results for Discraft on the FPO side of things. And then they also brought in Holland Handley, who is a player that I think really turned a lot of heads because she was able to do so well at Worlds. She was able to come in 3rd there. She also came in the top 5 at the MVP Open and at Jonesboro, and had a few other top 5s and top 10s throughout the course of the season as well. Super athletic, kind of newer, I guess you could say, to the scene compared to some of the veteran names. And I think that is only going to continue on. So, Discraft certainly a big winner in this offseason. You also have to say Lone Star Disc is a winner this offseason just because they kind of put themselves on the map. I mean, last year they really only had Chandler Kramer and one FPO player that was somewhat notable. But now they pick up Nico LaCastro. They pick up Lisa Fakis, Deanne Carey, as well as AJ Carey, Robert Burridge, who was the, Rookie of the Year. And they keep Kramer and so on and so forth. So they definitely made a lot of moves. They also grabbed Emerson Keith. I don't know if I mentioned that. So my apologies there. And, it's one of those things where, yes, Nico is going to be very controversial as a pickup. It's one of those things where he does have that polarizing personality, but sometimes that can help you, right? Because that means that his fans are going to be super strong fans. And sometimes having that polarizing nature allows you to have more publicity, and that whole all publicity is good publicity argument comes in, and it's one of those things where he probably deserves another chance, I guess you could say. Whether or not, he'll run into trouble again is up to him, and how people respond to it will vary, I'm sure, person to person. But there's no denying that Nico can still perform at a high level, and that he is going to get your company's name out there in one way or another. And so you got to say that Lone Star got some wins this year by picking up some players after not really having hardly anyone. I mean, Kramer certainly did well in Europe last year, being kind of the forehand only guy that kind of caught people's attention, that he got some results even, and that kind of helped introduce people to Lone Star. But now they have really gone out swinging big, picking up all these players, releasing a whole bunch of new molds. And certainly Lone Star will be a company that gets talked about a lot now because of all this. Also, some other winners we can talk about is ThoughtSpace. I mean, they picked up Thomas Gilbert, they picked up Maria Oliva, and they also picked up James Proctor, as well as maintaining Eric Oakley and Matt Bell. So this is pretty good because we know that Thomas Gilbert is definitely a big personality in disc golf, a very popular and likable player. Had some good results last year, cashed at quite a lot of Pro Tour events. It's kind of some of his, I guess, biggest finishes were coming 5th at Waco and top 10s at the Las Vegas Challenge and the Jonesboro Open, as well as the PCS Sula Open. And had some other top 20, top 25 finishes there as well. Then you go to someone like Mouret, who was very consistently in the top 10 in FPO last year. Didn't really have like any massive podium finishes on the Disc Golf Pro Tour itself, but you did come 4th at US Women's. And again, just had a ton of like top 10, top 15 finishes, and definitely is one of the more talented throwers of the disc. I think she has some of the more distant shots in the FPO division. And so, certainly a player that I think is only going to continue to get better as time goes on. And so obviously, in my opinion, therefore a good pickup for Thought Space. Clash, also similar to Lone Star, kind of put themselves on the map this year by picking up a lot of players. I mean, we knew of Clash because of the whole Nico situation, and then they wound up dropping Nico because of the whole situation. But this year, they kind of formed this partnership with Eric Oakley, where he actually designed a disc for them, and Eric Oakley kind of branches out, already being an Infinite and Thought Space player, but now is considered a Clash player. They also picked up Scott Withers, James Proctor, Erica Stinchcomb, and Heidi Lane. And Heidi Lane is kind of mostly known for being a really good player in Europe, but she did do pretty well at a couple of North American events last year. And so the point is that Clash has at least put themselves out there by picking up a decent amount of players, and you'll see their name out there more because of that, particularly, I think, on the FPO side. But definitely some MPO players that could represent them pretty well going forward. We also got to shout out Mint for getting a small win, I think, by picking up Mason Ford. He had several top 10, top 15 finishes on tour last year, cashed quite a lot on the Disc Golf Pro Tour, has been on coverage on and off throughout the course of last year, and Mint didn't really have anyone that was like a super big touring professional. Most of their sponsored players were kind of just like local to Texas, and that was kind of their focus, but picking up someone like Mason Ford, who does have the ability to go out there and get results on tour and get on coverage, is at least kind of putting Mint out there, and I think that's definitely going to be a win just off that alone. DGA also made a gain by picking up Cole Redolin. I think they also picked up Austin Hannum. So they pick up a couple of players to go alongside Katrina Allen and Andrew Marweed, who actually picked up an early win to kick off his 2023 year. So certainly only good things for DGA in that regard to pick up some people. Infinite, again, also makes their own pickups, getting Maria Oliva, as well as maintaining Drew Gibson and Eric Oakley. They also picked up Dustin Keegan. So Infinite, of course, continuing to kind of expand their presence as far as players. And lastly, I want to give kind of a shout out to Castoplast because they picked up Stacy Ronsley, who very likely would have been the 2021 Rookie of the Year for the Disc Golf Pro Tour if it wasn't for the whole Juliana Korver controversy that happened. Definitely has a huge background in disc sports, very athletic, definitely someone who's a very good thrower of the disc, both forehand and backhand. Seems to have a lot of raw talent. Maybe hasn't gotten all the same accolades as some other FPO players you would say out there, but definitely someone that I could see continuing to grow and get better and eventually get bigger results. And it only helps Castoplast, right? Because they didn't really have much representation in general, and now picking up an FPO player like Stacey Ronsley, who has potential to have performances that you'll know about, is certainly, I think, a win for Castoplast in the end. Then finally, we'll kind of talk about some neutral off seasons. With Innova, I think they had kind of a neutral off season where they kind of just maintained everyone. Definitely good news. They didn't really lose huge, like if they would have lost one like Calvin Heimberg, for example, that would have been like a bad loss, but they keep him. They still have Sexton. They still have Big Germ. Still got Barsby and Double G and Philo and so on and so forth. They also still have a very robust FPO team with Henna Blomroos and Evelina Salonen getting extensions, as well as Haley King, Kat Mersk, and Jessica Weiss. So they have a very strong FPO team. And they even got extensions on some other players who aren't maybe a part of their top team. For one, they kept Joel Freeman, which I think is a guy who could have easily been promoted within their system or gotten snagged by somebody else as far as a guy who could get results. But, of course, they still have Owen Scoggins, who had a hell of a year last year. They keep Nathan Queen, who we didn't get to see much last year because he was injured. but still a solid player. And then, of course, they got Philo. So while they had some losses, they kept some big names. And so I think Innova had kind of a neutral offseason. I think Prodigy, you probably have to say, is just neutral because they were able to keep players like Gannon Burr, Alden Harris, and Isaac Robinson. But I think the big thing for them, for me, that hurt was they didn't extend Gannon Burr, which means that I think there's a huge chance that Gannon Burr could be a big offseason move for someone in 2024. I think they kind of missed it here. I think they needed to probably find a way to go ahead and extend him because now that there's going to be a huge bidding war that Prodigy could easily lose. And if they lose Gannon Burr, then that's a huge piece of your MPO puzzle gone. You know, obviously Gavin Babcock went over to Discmania, so that was a little bit of a loss in that regard. But for right now, I'd say it's neutral. And I think the other thing that's kind of hurting Prodigy is they're kind of lacking on the FPO side. You know, ever since Katrina Allen left and Heather Young kind of took her hiatus, which I'm not sure what's going on with that, they never really picked up any big name FPO players to kind of fill that void. They have some solid ones out there, don't get me wrong, but it's just one of those situations where I feel like they're kind of just sitting at idle. They're not really making any big moves or anything along those lines, and that's something they have to really look at, I think, next year. Then, you know, when it comes to other neutral stuff, I'm going to say West Side's neutral. I'll pick them apart and kind of break up Trilogy. They are still with Matty O. I think they should have probably signed an extension with him already, but they have him for, 2023, and they'll have a chance to make an offer to keep him for 2024. Matty O is just such a likable dude. He's a consistent top 5 performer. I mean, everybody knows Matty O. Everyone loves Matty O. I'm a little bit biased because he comes from my area, but, even just the community at large, when you kind of just look around at all the different video content and stuff out there, people really love this guy's personality. And so the fact that Westside still has him for 2023 is certainly good news. They also picked up Sai Ananda, who is a pretty talented FPO player. It's one of those players that doesn't tour regularly, it seems, but when she does show up, she's actually picked up some pretty big results at some big events. So I actually think that was a pretty nice move after, of course, Erica Stinchcomb kind of being removed from the team or dropped. It may not sound that way from the verbiage that was out there. I think Sai is definitely a good pickup to replace that gap. And so in that sense, the West Side portion of Trilogy actually winds up being kind of a net neutral. Now, I do think that when you look at the rest of Trilogy, it's kind of just losses, right? Because Dynamic lost a ton of FPO talent. They only really maintained Macy Vela-Diaz, and then, of course, the big contract with Kona. But they lost Holland Hanley and Valerie Mandujano, which are pretty big losses. They also didn't really pick anyone up other than just retaining Macy Vela-Diaz, as I've already said. Yeah, they still have Ricky Wysocki. That's a huge name. But you feel at some point, if they're going to have as robust of a team as a Discraft or as an Innova, that eventually they're going to have to find a way to kind of bring more people into the fold. And we'll just have to see how that plays out. Same could be said for Latitude 64. Because Latitude, of course, has Kristen Tatar representing them on the FPO side of things and a couple other players that fit that as well. They have someone like Albert Tam, who fits them pretty well on the MPO side of things. And they also have Linus Carlson and a couple other people here and there like Connor O'Reilly and Tristan Tanner. But they did lose Emerson Keith. And they just don't have that really big MPO name that's consistently placing in the top 5. So I do wonder if Latitude could maybe look to try to make a move next year. Maybe they go after someone like Gannon Burr, for instance, in that whole bidding war that will probably happen next year for his contract. Who really knows? But I'll be interested to see how Trilogy tries to play things out next year because I think that they did kind of take some losses this year. And then finally, of course, Discmania lost, right? They lost Simon, a face of their company, someone who was synonymous with their brand, someone that really represented them super well in various ways, whether it be on coverage or through his own YouTube content or being a part of other content, just being a great ambassador for Discmania and a guy who performed very well for them last year with the 4 wins. And I think Discmania is kind of in a weird place now because, they still have Eagle McMahon, obviously, but he is coming off injury, so we don't really know exactly how good he's going to be. He obviously had that really crazy European Open story last year where he kind of came back and won it all, and him and Paul Macbeth were just light years ahead of the rest of the field. But then he came back also and had kind of a rough Worlds performance. So because of that, that's makes him feel still kind of shaky to me. I'm not really sure where he's at with his forehand. I'm not sure where he's really at mentally. He definitely is the guy that could come out and, perform very well next year. He definitely has a proven track record of being able to be successful consistently, be a top 5 player in the world. but we just have to see how that pans out, how well he's recovered, how good of a shape he's in after this offseason, because he is now the new face of the company, basically, right? And that's a lot of pressure. They obviously still have Kyle Klein. They still have Cynthia Ricciardi. They extended her. They also extended Ella Hansen. So they have some good FPO talent in that regard. But they picked up Gavin Babcock real quick to throw that one in there. And then, of course, they have someone like Nicholas Antala and some other European players who are pretty big. So the thing is, Discmania maintained everything else but losing Simon. But Simon is such a colossal loss that you still have to say they're a loser this offseason. Now, with that said, they do have the potential to be a big winner next year, because if it's true that they got a big buyout amount for Simon when he made his move to MVP, and because they didn't really spend big this year, they could be sitting on a little bit of a war chest coming into next year to be able to be one of those companies bidding for someone like Gannon Burr alongside a Latitude, the Dynamic, and of course Prodigy, who will probably want to re-sign him. They can maybe try to go after some other big names out there if they had the money available. It is one of those situations where I think we're still in this weird gray area where we don't know if contracts matter or not, because they still get broken, or maybe buyouts get involved, and so they could just go that route. And so while Discmania did lose a lot, they still have some big names at the table to represent them. And again, I think they can come in strong next year with the money that they have potentially earned through the buyout of Simon, or that they have just saved by not spending big this year. And so I think Discmania could still kind of make a run with who they have, and again, make a big splash in 2024 with some big signings at that point. So that's going to do it for this first episode. I don't want to make these too long. This is about 30 minutes or so. That's kind of what I'm aiming for, and maybe just kind of do this maybe weekly, just to kind of talk about news and results and things of that nature, in which case maybe those episodes might be a little bit shorter. Again, this is kind of an experiment to see if people like this sort of content. It's pretty much audio only, so you can kind of just put it on in the background while you're doing other things. Maybe it's something I could put on Spotify or something. I do think that me being a talking head by myself might bore some people, but maybe some people enjoy it, and that's why I'm kind of just experimenting with it, see what people think, and then we can see going forward. I've been hesitant on doing some type of official podcast just because I don't know if I could line up a consistent co-host that makes sense, right? Again, it just brings in the factor of scheduling and other things, whereas I know I can do this by myself because I just got to make sure I show up, you know what I mean? So that's really easy to do. And then lining up interviews can always be difficult. There's already so many shows out there doing interviews, with Smashbox, the Nick and Matt show, and Foundation, and so it just becomes kind of hard to find out where I fit in that regard. And there was also some chances I was going to do some stuff with the Disc Golf Pro Tour on their YouTube channel, podcast-wise, but I'm not sure what's happening with that. So I'm just kind of up in the air right now. But I wanted to put something out just to see how people liked it, to see how I liked it, and we'll go from there, whether or not this continues on or not. Let me know in the comments below if you enjoyed this content, if you want to see more of this content. Again, I had put a community post out before I recorded this one, where there seemed to be some interest, so I wanted to give it a shot. And I use this episode to just kind of introduce myself a bit, talk a little bit about the idea of leaks and whether they're good or bad, as well as just kind of go through some of the winners and losers of this offseason. Again, future episodes will probably be more about event results and just whatever news came out that week and just kind of my takes on it. And either people will dig it and care, or they'll be like, who the heck is this guy? Why do I care what he thinks? We'll see. So anyway, hope you folks enjoyed it. Follow, subscribe for more. Catch you next time.